Perfect. Welcome everyone who is filtering in. We will get started in a couple minutes. Just wanted to start letting folks in early so they could get situated, and we will begin promptly at the hour to be respectful of people's times. Realize I'm still sharing my screen from getting set up to start with. Look at the people pouring in. Fantastic. And I know I'm going to get a couple more things set up to get started. And like I said, we'll get started promptly at the hour. So many people are flooding in. I'll just keep repeating it a couple times. You'll have to hear it a few different times as we go through it all. All right. So everyone, there's a few links in the chat. You can ignore those. We'll put those back in at the time when they're appropriate. And that was us just sharing some links back and forth as we were prepping for the webinar. But let's go ahead and get started so we can be respectful of everyone's time. So you're welcome to throw it in the chat where you're from, what your role is. There's a fair number of you. There's probably be about 100 people in the room. Kathleen, I see you had raised your hand. With this many people, we're probably not going to pull people onto voice for questions, but you can either throw your Q&A into the Q&A pod, which is where we're going to be fielding most of the questions. And you're also welcome to throw questions into the chat as well, so that we can try to keep things organized. Happy Halloween. I totally forgot it was Halloween. Yeah, so for those that are observant, you may notice that we have a different crew of people here than is entirely advertised. We'll get to that in a moment. I don't know if it's the Halloween curse of trying to host a webinar on Halloween or not, but it's been a bumpy ride leading up to this webinar. So let's get rolling now. I'm seeing more people filtering in. So let's start with logistics, then we'll roll into introduction. Any question you have, throw it in the Q&A pod. We're going to be doing our best to pull those questions in, lacing them into the conversation. You're also entirely welcome to have whole sidebar conversations in the chat. We will not be offended. Generally, when I join a webinar, half the interesting stuff comes from the presenters and half comes from whatever happens in the chat. So if you have something interesting to share, throw it out there. We'll be doing our best to monitor that as well. David's going to be taking care of that for us. And be able to try to pull those back in. We will be recording this and we will be sharing it out after the fact. I'll be uploading it to the same page that you use to register for the website, and it'll be available there. And we'll send that out maybe a day or two after, depending on how that all works. So thank you for that one. Let me go ahead and share my screen and let's get started. So yeah, hopefully you're in the right place. First results from deploying instructional design at scale. Let's begin with introductions. Brad, if you'd like to introduce yourself, we'll start with you. We'll roll into Heather and then I'll do myself.
Sure. My name is Brad Carpenter. I am a still freshly minted instructional designer at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, in Birmingham, Alabama. Prior to becoming a designer, I spent 12 years teaching in secondary school, primarily 7th grade English. So I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you, Brad. And Heather?
I'm Heather Brown. I'm an instructional designer for the Center for Teaching Excellence at Tidewater Community College, and I am the co-host for the EDUCAUSE AI community group, which we'd love to have you join, and Marcus has graciously allowed me to share that link so that if you'd like to join a community on AI like-minded people, please follow that link and join us.
Just had a question come in QA about enabling the chat save function. I actually don't know how to do that, so on the fly, but what I will do is I will grab the chat and send it out with the recording. So anything that's said in the chat, you also can find as we're going through. And we also have with us David. David's going to help us with a lot of logistics stuff. He is newly into the EdTech world for about the past year and a half. He spends a lot of time with us talking to instructors, understanding their pain points, learning around kind of what faculty want and what's going on. He's going to be trying his best to keep up with the chat and everything that happens there and pulling those pieces out, as well as interrupting us with the Q&A. And finally, my name's Marcus. I am the CEO of Harmonize. Harmonize Learning, we build discussion tools and other communication tools for inside of your LMS. We were supposed to have with us Dr. Marion Pope from Sampson Community College. She had an unfortunate personal incident come up and so couldn't make it. I'm guessing it's the Halloween curse as well, much like myself. If I get winded halfway through this webinar, I'm coming off a fresh hospital stay. Nothing unfortunate has happened to Brad, so we're going to count him lucky and not curse him, hopefully. But I'll be representing some of the information that Dr. Pope shared from her college, and as we roll through all of this. Okay. So to start with, I want to go through what does instructional design at scale mean, because it can mean 1,000 things as we're going through it all. So I want to cover, to start with, a little bit of who we targeted, what we targeted them with, and then we're going to roll into a discussion around what some of the results from that looked like. So the first few slides will be me talking through things around what did ChatGPT at scale mean for us, what does instructional design at scale mean, so you can see what our experiment and what our rollout looked like, so you can understand what it is. First, I think it's important to talk about who we targeted. So like I said, Harmonize is a discussion platform. The people who are using us have already chosen to adopt an LTI tool to replace their built-in LMS discussions because they found them lacking. So the people that we're dealing with are probably more comfortable with technology adoption than your average user. They are trying to make things better. Most of our instructors are online instructors, so the people that we are targeting are the online instruction community. And so I just wanted to frame that for you, so when we go through some of the results of what we're looking at, you can understand the audience that we're trying to work with. And when we say instructional design at scale, what we had set out to do, so ChatGPT came out and it was like, boom, crazy, awesome, it does all these amazing things. What can you actually do that's useful with it? And one of the big problems that instructors face were, how do I actually write a good discussion prompt? Does my school have enough instructional design staff to meet with me? Do I have the time to meet with my instructional design staff? How can I actually start a discussion with a good discussion prompt? And so what we set out to do as our first pass into helping instructors by using ChatGPT is to say, okay, there's textbooks on this. We know what a good discussion prompt looks like. ChatGPT is good at writing things as long as you coach it well enough. So can we roll out a tool that when an instructor is building a new discussion activity or online participation activity in their class, can we make it easier for them to use sort of the tried and true things that instructional designers would do if they met with them? And so to that end, what we did is we said, okay, we need a little bit of information from the students, and we also need to tell ChatGPT exactly what we want it to do. We don't just want to say, hey, ChatGPT, write a discussion prompt, because who knows what it'll actually do. Instead, we picked 30 or 40 different instructional strategies, and then we coached ChatGPT on what each of those strategies look like and what it means to use them. And then it was really key and really important to us that whatever we churn up, we let the instructors see, choose to use or choose not to use, which we'll talk about that in a moment, and edit it and make it their own. So the instructor is always in the loop on what we're churning up here. So I'm actually going to show you a quick demo of that. So let me do it in a window here. So like I said, Harmonize is a discussion tool. Anytime an instructor is actually editing their topic, we are going to offer them the ability to either A, write a topic from scratch with ChatGPT, or B, improve an existing topic if they want. For conciseness here, I'm using an existing topic when they come into the edit screen. The only thing we changed about our app as we rolled this out, and we rolled this out in August, right before the start of the fall semester, is we put a little banner here that basically said, let ChatGPT help write your discussion prompt. And if they choose to do this, we're framing it as a brainstorm activity because we're trying to make it trying to make it comfortable for instructors to be able to accomplish. We don't want them to say, we're writing it for you. We're helping you brainstorm what you want to write, so that we can try to get instructors pulled in to be able to make it their own. So when we launch up the Brainstorm UI, we needed to ask a few things of the instructors to be able to determine which of our instructional design strategies are actually useful. So what we had hoped to achieve was, let's ask the minimal number of questions such that we can generate a good prompt. That will allow us to pull in the most instructors who are comfortable using this. For those that are from an instructional design or an education world, you'll recognize this phrasing here as Bloom's taxonomy. We stayed away from using the phrase Bloom's taxonomy. We just focused on, I want my students to, and we default it to the Bloom's taxonomy level, apply. And they can always change that as they're going through. We also labeled it a complexity level for those that maybe don't really understand how the Bloom's pyramid works, so that they could think like, oh, what you're generating is too complex for my students. I can make it less complex, or I can make it more complex and move up and down that scale. The other thing we asked for the instructor is, what do they want their students to discuss? If they had an existing prompt, we would pull it in and pre-fill it, or they could have actually been here and, excuse me, they could have been here and actually entered in some raw data of like, oh, I want to talk about physics and particle wave theory and et cetera, et cetera. What am I teaching this week, basically, is what we were after. And the final piece we asked, which was entirely optional, was if you have a learning objective, fantastic, give it to us. And then let's jump into generation of prompts. I can generate the topic instructions here. So like I was saying, what we were doing here is that we are taking that information they provided. They told us Bloom's level apply. They gave us some information about what they wanted to teach, and we are funneling that into ChatGPT. What we've done here, and I meant to give you some examples of these so you can see, so I will get those back out to you. That was my previous slide and I went through too quickly, but I'll leave you with some examples to see what some of these prompts look like as they're being written. And the idea was, we're going to pick a strategy at random. We're not even going to ask the instructor to pick a strategy, because they're probably not going to know what the different strategies are called. Why would they use one versus the other? We thought it would be better for them to actually just see it written out with their topic that they were working on. This one was analyzing political cartoons. And then we'll build a prompt for them. At this point, as soon as it's done writing the prompt, they will have a couple choices. They can choose to say, try something different, which is the button here, which will pick an entirely different instructional strategy, churn it up for them, see if they like that one better. And at any point, they can always just click this, add it to my topic instructions, which pulls it back into an editor, allows them to change anything they want about it, be it hallucinations or just structure of the prompt that they didn't like, and then continue on. So when we say instructional design at scale, this is what we mean. We're putting sort of at the fingertips of the instructors the ability to pull in some textbook knowledge of what instructional design means without really understanding it, and churn up examples for them to then choose from as they go through. Let me actually go back one here. If anyone wants, you can actually scan this QR code here, or David can throw this URL out into the chat for us. And you can see either now or later on, if you want to follow up, I had it generate three different examples so that you can see the type of thing we're churning up, because I think that's important. Like, do you feel it's a good quality prompt? Do you want to see what it was that we're actually giving to instructors? So you can take a look at those either offline or additional as we go through. Okay, so that's what we meant at ChatGPT at scale. I'm going to do one data slide, and then we're going to roll into Brad and Heather talking about some of the ideas here, and some of the instructor adoption ideas, and some of the concerns and some of the surprises we had, frankly, as we rolled through some of this. So remember, as I get into this data or on anything that we're doing here, you can throw your questions in the Q&A, or you can put them out in the chat, have a sidebar conversation on the chat. So remember, when I showed it to you, the only thing we did was we added a blue banner that said, let ChatGPT help write your discussion prompt. Most of the instructors were already familiar with the UI that we were showing. For those that weren't, we did do some training for any new instructors, but not every instructor gets trained in terms of using the tool. Of all of the topics that were written in our system after this launched in like a 3-month period, 3.5% of them chose to even try to use ChatGPT to help write the discussion prompt. That's not terribly surprising to me, because we didn't broadcast it. We didn't promote it tons. It was more of a soft launch of like, here's a brand new thing that we've never done before. Let's put it out there and see if people stumble into it and what we think. However, we saw wide variation across institutions around what percentage of their instructors were actually choosing to try it or not. And so let me go ahead and now we can turn it over a little bit to Brad and Heather to talk through. Well, maybe let's start with Brad around how your institution was prepping for this AI world coming at us. Because then to frame it real quick, Brad School, University of Alabama, Birmingham, was one of our highest percentage adopters, which is why I reached out to Brad to join us to say, what did you do? What happened? Why could that be? Please help us understand.
Yeah, and I guess more context for our usage with Harmonize. So we had kind of a soft launch, I guess, in the summer. We kind of had some instructors, that were definitely on us about finding, a more robust discussion tool and more engaging. We definitely advertised out to them to kind of really pilot whenever it launched, and we kind of enabled it in Canvas over the summer. And of course, with the ChatGPT function coming in August, and then us really kind of pushing and advertising the Harmonize tool within Canvas for this fall semester. And then him coming back with those numbers, that I was a little shocked that, that so many people had used it, especially the AI function of it. And kind of going back and trying to, reconcile the data with sort of where we are in terms of adoption and guidelines. Last spring, last April is really when our faculty got together and started having these open conversations and having people speak and kind of dig into the resources that were out there in terms of AI usage in higher ed. And a task force was developed. And then in the end of June, July-ish, our university kind of published guidelines in terms of use of AI in the classroom. And I think, our university really took the approach of, this thing's coming, whether, you agree with it or not. We need to make sure that we provide guidance and guardrails in terms for our students and faculty on how to, let this technology best serve us. And I think that David probably tossed out, we've got a public-facing webpage that kind of breaks down the task force. There's a pretty robust document about their methodology for discussing AI and everything from example syllabus statements and things like that, as well as, peer-reviewed resources that are listed and hyperlinked that help to guide them in that decision-making process. So I think we're thinking of those numbers that Marcus is talking about and where we were sort of as a university. There was certainly a buzz that the task force was in place. These conversations were taking place in late spring, going through the summer, and us really not knowing what it was going to look like. I think there was a lot of trepidation perhaps on a lot of people in terms of, should I use it? Is it going to be okay? And so the bulk of the instructors, I think, that I work with, it's more me pushing the Harmonize tool and look at these features, look at the level of engagement that you can have, look at its usability. And there really hasn't been a large percentage of instructors that I've dealt with either as groups or personally on one-on-one sort of training sessions where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to hold off on the AI just for a second, because right now I'm letting you get used to look at what you can do with, the harmonized resources that are present without clicking this button and perhaps overwhelming you with, ChatGPT and AI and those functions. So the numbers are certainly surprising in one way and not another, but that's kind of where we are as a university. And I think that's how I can kind of reconcile those numbers with the level of usage that we're having and engagement with the brainstorm function.
And someone just asked in the Q&A, Heather, before you jump in,
Brad's
resource page, David actually just put it out in chat as the www.uab.edu link he just put out, so you can take a look at the faculty AI resources. Over to you, Heather.
Oh, thanks. I was just going to say that I've noticed over the past several months in the terms of AI adoption that when you have a top-down approach where your leadership is talking about AI and adoption of AI, faculty are more inclined to utilize the tool and utilize the Canvas, the Harmonize, if they have Harmonize currently, the GPT, the chat brainstorm, then it's from the ground up and trying to get people to get on board. It's just been an observation. I don't know if others have observed that or not, but that's something that I've been recognizing lately.
Cool. And Heather, you had a good guide. I think David was going to share it out, or maybe you were, I don't remember, in terms of just a Padlet of all of the different AI policies that are out there.
Yeah,
This struck me. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
I got that. Yeah, no, I have a colleague out in Oregon that created one, and then which are university policies, and then there's the Lance Eaton one, which I think a lot of people might have seen already, but I am going to put that out here as well, because it's that has a lot of course policy too.
Okay. And what Dr. Pope was going to share in this in this regard was that, and I think this gets to the point of like, you need to make your instructors comfortable. Like, hey, I'm telling my students maybe don't use it, but on the other hand, I'm going to use it. Is that okay? And having very clear policies from your university before you try to roll out any AI tool, I think is going to help with adoption. Dr. Pope actually stood up at their convocation in front of all of their instructors, talked through what this tool was, talked through that she had worked with it, she was happy with the results, and encouraged them that it could be a useful tool for them to have better discussions, or also just to save them some time, because if they are coming in and building a new course, here's a quick way to get really sound strategies in place. And she had the third highest percentage adoption, and the only thing she did was stand up at the meeting and make it okay. Basically, give her stamp of approval on it, and she probably has a really lovely culture of trust there. I think she's been there quite some time. And so, from back to what Heather was saying, from like the leadership perspective, like to have the leadership say this is okay to do, in fact, encouraged to do, helped with adoption there as well.
I noticed that Audrey put a chat in the chat that top-down diffusion doesn't typically work that way at her institution. And yeah, I understand that. I think we all can relate to that. But it's in this particular instance with AI and diffusion, I think where everybody is just uncertain on adoption or what to even do, that if you have leadership that's speaking to it and using it and saying it's okay, we can start to explore these Gen AI tools. I think that really helps, but it might not necessarily be that message at your institution or not.
Yeah, and it's a subtle difference there that I think I'd love to highlight more on what Heather was saying. It's not the top down, like use this tool, because yeah, we've seen the same thing. Like we always start at the ground level with Harmonize and work our way up.
Right.
Because if the highest people come down and be like, use this tool, people are like, who, what, who are you?
Right.
Type of thing.
And that's what I meant to, that's what I'm trying to convey, is it's not a, you need to use this tool. It's more of, hey, this tool is awesome. You might want to give it a try.
And you won't get in trouble.
Right. Right.
If you use AI to build your course content, we're okay with that. That message needs to be put out there loud and clear. All right, so let's get a little more into the adoption data, because there was some fascinating stuff here that I think we can get into. I went into this, so I'm a firm believer in, science-based. You've been taught to educate. There are right ways to educate. Meet with an instructional designer at all costs, like hallelujah type of thing. That's in my worldview how things work. And I've often thought, like, okay, well, the main reason instructors don't use sort of quality built by instructional designer content is because they don't have the time to go meet with an instructional designer, or maybe the university doesn't have enough instructional design staff. And so when I thought, well, if I can get people in to see a prompt, then we're going to have success. We're going to have large success. And we did. I don't want to denigrate the success we've had so far. But what surprised me was that of the users who came in and actually clicked and started generating topics and saw the topics and generated one or more as they were playing with the tool, only 55% of those that saw those prompts actually ended up using that prompt. And I don't know why that is. We haven't dug into that yet. It could be because of the slice of users we're working with. Like maybe they have a very specific thing they were setting out to do because they're, they're sort of discussion super users. Like they chose to use a more advanced discussion tool that's better for them. Maybe that's why, or maybe they just don't like the instructional design strategies that we were turning up. And I encourage you to look at some of those examples that we'd put up there. So you can see, I just clicked through 3 of them. So you can see the type of thing we were turning up for users. And Brad and Heather, I don't know if you have more to add on this, but this definitely caught me off guard. I was like, wow, only 55%, really? Like, all right, let's go into the next level down of adoption. So I guess my takeaway from some of this is don't assume that your faculty are, even if it's written for them and handed to them, that they are actually going to want to use some of the core instructional design strategies that are out there. The other takeaway that was really interesting, and I sort of suspected this, which is why when we were asking instructors our initial prompts, I didn't say what Bloom's taxonomy level do you want to do. Instead, it was like, what do you want your students to accomplish? Remembering facts, understanding facts, applying those facts. I didn't show it in the UI, but when they click to change that, we actually give them a better description of what those things means as well. And you can see here in the numbers and in the graph that the vast majority of people left the default to be apply, which may have been appropriate. I don't want to say it's inappropriate, but this was one of the things that I was concerned about, is that if there's a default, are users going to change it? Are they going to know how to change it? Are they going to know what level their students are actually at?
Right. Yeah,
And,
I mean, and that's kind of goes back to your 55% or the percentage of people who actually use your previous slide, right?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
that's
a lot of faculty might not understand Bloom's taxonomy, to be quite honest with you, and how to align an objective or even write a measurable learning objective based from Bloom's, and then align that with the output, your brainstorming discussion prompt for their assignment. So there could be a disconnect there as well.
Yeah, I think I can also speak to, especially, with our institution having just, the traditional Canvas discussions and its limited capabilities in terms of interactivity with users, and that use case of maybe they're just having, their students analyze a couple of articles or something like that, and then comment on someone else's post or something. And it's really, it's not that robust. There's not much going on and interaction going on between it. And I think a lot of, our users, which, have been jumping on to Harmonize and using it in, unique ways and sort of learning what they can do. And I think they're building those discussions as assessments, and as it becomes more and more robust and that capability and that ease of use is known, I think they'll be able to get into these deeper levels of these prompts that are generated, because we kind of saw this very engaging and sort of, they're going to, you're going to have people that are going to meet and they're going to do this, and then they're going to come back and have another conversation. It was a very sort of involved activity that you're getting generated with that. And I feel like sometimes, you see that printout of that page that's being produced by the ChatGPT bot, people are like, I don't know if I'm ready for all of this yet, And so I think what it's probably going to come to, and Marcus and I talked about, we have a technology fair every year where we, try and have our vendors and our creators like Marcus come and, pair up with what we call like our power users, someone that has kind of gone in and used this ChatGPT function of it and brainstorm, and where we have a faculty member or two next to Marcus, talking about how it works for them. That's when we typically see the adoption jump from there, and it's kind of like whenever as a designer and we sit down one-on-one with someone, or we're sitting down with a group and we're kind of walking them through that technology and showing them how it works, there's going to be greater adoption there. Like you said, they might not have known that they could click off apply, right? And we're kind of just getting to that point to where we are broadcasting it and really, frankly, becoming more comfortable with it ourselves, I think, as well, as I'm kind of exploring it.
Makes sense, yeah. And it's one of the things that we're going to look at from a product design. And I think this is where, if your university is getting ready to roll out either custom ChatGPT integrations and such, my big belief is you're never just going to be able to hand instructors the OpenAI ChatGPT functionality, because they don't know what makes a good discussion prompt. So will they be able to make it jump through the hoops? So you have to simplify it in some way for them. And I think you're going to have to go through iterations. Like, we're using some of this to consider, like, well, once they've generated, are we going to put a button right next to where they generated that says too complex? Click that button and we will drop you down a Bloom's level and regenerate, so that it's an easier path to be able to march up and down those. Similarly, some of the activities we're using are group activities. And some instructors may not be willing to take on the legwork of either using their LMS groups to break people into groups, or having the students self-select into groups. And so they might avoid some of those strategies simply because there's more logistics and more classroom management involved as well. Which gets into which strategies did instructors like, which I think is an interesting next step. So at the Bloom's level of apply, which was, I think, the one we had enough data to sort of statistically think about which strategies did instructors like, we were offering up 5 different strategies, meaning you could have clicked the try it again button and we would have picked a different strategy 5 times before we frankly ran out of strategies. Like, after 5, if we couldn't entice you, then maybe we're like, I don't know, good luck, type of thing. There is always, I didn't really demo this, we did offer the ability to be able to interact directly with ChatGPT to make suggestions about the prompt. Oh, add in this subject matter expertise. Oh, make this less complex, make this more complex, simplify the language, those types of things. Most people aren't using that. But when I look at the apply level, if all instructional strategies were similarly enticing to instructors, we would expect this graph to be 20% for each of the different strategies. And you can see that's not true. You can see that by far the biggest loser was a strategy where only 10% people chose to use it, or 10% of the adopted prompts used it, which is this idea of like, hey, student, I'd like you to write an instruction manual teaching this, how to do this type of thing that we're looking at for your students, and then have your students come back and critique each other's instruction manuals. It's textbook discussion activity strategy for online assignment, but instructors just didn't like it. They didn't adopt it as a high of a rate. And I think this is going to get really interesting as we get more and more data in, because right now we don't have enough data to be able to start to see some of these trends at those non-apply levels, because currently people have not yet selected the non-apply levels enough to be able to get at that. But which strategies are instructors adopting? And therefore, do we need to add more strategies or different strategies at some of these levels, so that there are things that the instructors want to do and want to teach as they go through them? So I thought that was pretty fascinating, and the type of thing that we're going to be keeping our finger on the pulse of as we go through, because there's a lot of interesting work we can do there. The other thing we're going to be able to look at, and this will be, at the end of the semester, we wrap this up and maybe dig into it a little more, is like, what kind of actual engagement happened in these topics? We're still gathering data on that, so I don't have that data for you today. But hey, if you chose the textbook strategy, think, pair, share, what kind of peer connectivity did you get in your online discussion? Which of these strategies actually work for you, type of thing. So whenever you're, go ahead.
That'll be interesting to see that data. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see, and how they compare, frankly, to some of this raw instructor generated ones, because some instructors generate amazing prompts, and frankly, some instructors do not. When I look at even the people who have come to the tool because they like the interaction better, when they write a discussion prompt, it might be just something that says, discuss the reading from this week, full stop. And that may be fine, especially if they are really hands-on in sort of the synchronous sessions, or in some other way encouraging students what they want to pull out of them, et cetera. But can we do better than that as we're going into this? And how does the interactivity compare from some of these compared to ones that we didn't write with ChatGPT, to make sure that we're actually doing better than sort of what instructors are writing on their own? Okay. One last thing that I'd like to come back to in the UI, just because I think it drives home the point we're talking about. Most faculty are not trained as instructional designers. They aren't trained in educational theory. When I come back into the topic edit screen, let me cancel out of this real quick. It's all behind all my Zoom windows though. So there, when I launched into the ChatGPT, we actually had this optional learning objective. Almost no one used this correctly in terms of the learning objectives they put in. If they chose to put anything into the learning objectives, it was generally either not a learning objective at all, or it was not a measurable learning objective. Having a learning objective obviously helps us make a better discussion prompt. And so I think it's really important to assess what do we have to train our instructors on? So maybe we don't have to train them entirely on educational theory as much if we can do this type of work for them. But if we are going to ask them questions, are they trained enough to know what the answer to those questions are to be able to get that information for us? Because I would say by and large, the learning objective field was not helpful. We didn't get information in any statistical way out of that that made for better discussion prompts. And so now we have to reassess, do we put that in, or do we offer training guides on what a learning objective means?
Well, I was going to ask, is there like a little information thing that says what the learning objective, like, you can like scroll over it. Can't remember.
We have a video for how to use the tool and what kind of information we're looking for, but we don't delve into how to write a course learning objective. We aren't trying to teach them to be teachers at this point. And it's a good question of like, do we need to? Because
maybe just a mouse over, it says this is what your student would be able to do at the end of this module.
Yeah, give them some examples or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's some guidance there.
You're kicking. I get it.
Yeah, I would say any reinforcement on it, even if it is just like a quick example, if that's possible, because I think I could speak for most designers. I think we spend the most of our time kind of hammering out, you've got the content, but we've got to make sure that it's measurable, and does it align, with your instructional materials? Do your assessments align with what you're trying to get your students to achieve? And for someone like me, having taught for 12 years in the K-12 background, that it's kind of ingrained in my head. If it's not just ingrained in your head, and having taken education courses, it takes time to build that into. And so, it's having a way to just reinforce that, even if it's where you've got your little, hey, let's change the domain, where you have up here, here's a quick little thing. Remember, if they're going to apply something, it needs to do X, Y, and Z. If they're going to create, it means this, right? So any positive reinforcement that can go in, I think would be great.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting because so the next thing we're working on is generating rubrics. And after going through some of this data and working with our teams, I'm like, okay, we just need to not start with rubrics and just blow straight into rubrics, because most faculty are probably going to look at a big blown rubric and be like, what the, I don't want to use that, and then run away. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. And so we're actually kind of, based on this data, changing the approach to how we're rolling out our next step, which is, hey, let's generate some simple student success criteria. What does success mean? What would be the middle column on a rubric, just so that even if you're not going to use it to grade, can we get instructors to adopt that? If they want to adopt that, can we say, hey, do you want to use that to grade, and then create a very simple rubric for them to use, or then continue and generate the full rubric? So that's one of, I think, the big learnings that came out of us pulling this data together to present and share for this webinar. And I was just looking at the data in general, is that there are a lot of faculty out there that if we can win over, that are not necessarily gung-ho into instructional design and rubrics and all of these things, we can make the world a better place. But we have to be super careful about how we step people into it, so that we pull in more instructors to be able to accomplish those things. Okay. So I guess, yes, now open to questions. Like, do people have questions that they'd like us to come back in and discuss? You can throw those into the Q&A. Because I do run a business, I did stick a little URL up here of like, if you do want to learn more about Harmonize, you can do so, set up a demo, hit this QR code, or David can throw this out. But the main intent here is to get your questions answered. Like, if your university is looking at rolling out anything, including ChatGPT, what do you need to do to prep your instructors to be able to actually leverage it and use it? What do you need to be able to do to prep your instructional designers to talk about it, and from a culture perspective? And then what do you need to do to be able to monitor its success? Like, what kind of data can you use to gather? and then to take a feedback loop of that of like, okay, well, obviously course learning objectives didn't work. We need better examples. We need better training on those, or frankly, we need to remove them from the UI if we're not going to do that because of that. So yeah, questions about the data, questions for Brad or for Heather, feel free to put them in the Q&A. We can answer them. And then, yeah, logistically speaking, I will be sending out the recording of this, and we'll send out the chat as well, since someone asked about that. Someone asked in the chat, are you finding that it was seamless integrating Harmonize Brainstorm with the Canvas LMS? The good news is that we'd already integrated Harmonize as a discussion tool into Canvas, and that we spent a lot of time making that seamless. And so getting Brainstorm to work inside of there was easy. They'd already adopted Harmonize at that point. So we didn't actually have to just try to get Brainstorm integrated, because they'd already integrated Harmonize to do better discussions. And so that was a sidestep. So we didn't have to directly attack that problem. What kind of other questions do we have? Just trying to understand the scope of users and duration they had. Yes, so this is a great question. So the question came in from Claudia Pearson, just trying to understand the scope of users and duration they had. It launched in August to all users who had Harmonized at their institution, and data spans for 2 months. Actually, 3 months through early October. I pulled the data, and how many instructors used and how many institutions. How many institutions? We have about 140 institutions that are using Harmonize who had the chance to use it. I really only looked at sort of the top, the sort of the people who were having higher adoption in terms of the schools that were heavy users of it. So I don't know of the 140, 150, how many of them actually had instructors attempted and worked through it. What was the other question? How many instructors used in terms of that? You know, I pulled the number of topics that were used. We generated almost 1,000 topics in terms of scope. There were instructors who generated multiple topics for their course. So maybe they were teaching one course and generated 3 or 4 topics to be able to accomplish that. So there's 1,000 topics, less than 1,000 instructors who had actually used it in this 3-month period. But it was very rushed. It was very much like, I think maybe like August 8th, we rolled it out and it was like, hey, fall semester's coming. Good luck, go with it. Type of thing. So it's going to be really interesting to see now that we've had a semester to talk about it and share, and can we start to do more advanced notice into the spring timeframe as people start to build their courses to see what we can continue to do for that. I have a comment from an anonymous attendee here. The only guidance given by our university is at the discretion of the instructor. This has our faculty either terrified of any AI or blindly trying to figure out how to use it appropriately. Do you have any advice on how to guide our department when a university doesn't have a solid stance? Heather, I'm wondering if you have an answer for this one, because you are well more immersed in this world than I am.
You know, at the discretion of the instructor, that's not a bad thing. But it's also kind of just like the anonymous attendee said, it kind of leaves everybody in limbo of where to go and what to do. I would suggest that, I don't know what position you're in, but if you could start gathering some faculty and start holding some informational webinars or brown bag lunches, little chats about what AI is. Start attending, you know, seminars like this, but start playing with the AIs. You know, that's kind of how we started. And then I started doing little lunch and learn Zoom meetings with our faculty to talk about, you know, what is AI, how it can be utilized, the pros, the cons, you know, literacy, talking about biases and student data privacy and things of that nature. But just really, it's starting to see what the tool can do for you, because it can save a lot of time, and it's a great tool in my opinion. Now, Bradley, do you have any other information, I mean, that you could share from your university and how you guys started getting things out there?
I believe it started at UAB very much how you described it at your institution, with the idea of faculty and instructors getting together and seeing that, this is something that's very much present, and it's just going to become more and more present, as we go on with, students using it. And really, how do we get ahead of this, right? How do we get ahead of this and put guidelines up? And it kind of started as those sort of brown bag lunches. And then whenever it got, enough of a sort of movement behind it, the faculty was able to sit there and bring this up and say, this is real. This is something that we need to put guardrails and guidance around. So I think certainly a movement from the instructors and the faculty in terms of saying it's necessary for us to meet this head on, because it's here whether we like it or not. We definitely want to make sure that it serves, students as best as it can. So.
Yeah, I would say strength in numbers would be my advice, much like unionizing at a workplace. Like if you get together with 3 or 4 instructors and you talk about something and then you broadcast it out to whatever leadership of like, we had this great conversation, here's a summary, here's what we're thinking about trying. They've been put on notice. It was at your discretion. You met, you discussed, you shared, and then other instructors can follow suit as well, so that you can sidestep the terrified thing. Because if you met and talked about it and then published the results to someone in a leadership position of what you were looking at, then you have some protection there of like, hey, you told us at our discretion, we met, we shared with you what we talked about, and then we went and did it. And you can't really be angry at us for that, can you? I mean, they could, I suppose, but in a just world, they would not be angry at you.
I would say there's also several great links. I think I saw Ohio State University, someone shared a link to their AI guidance, from their faculty, and like had a decision tree, had some really good stuff. The article about what our institution did, look at all of those, bring those to the powers that be and say, here's what other institutions, here's how they are approaching, maybe we should look at this.
Yeah.
Marcus,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Marcus, we had a comment here from Nathan Stevens, who said, I like to ask faculty to bring their favorite lesson in and then show them how AI can help with it. Just I'll share that with you, see if maybe that's something you want to expand on.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, something we haven't done yet in the generation of them is to actually build topic discussions that actually explicitly leverage AI, because frankly, we were a little frightened of what the response would be to that, and would we violate different institution policies on whether or not that's acceptable. But I really like the idea. Like, you can't stop students from using AI, and they need to be trained to use AI, and it makes for a really fascinating assignment if you're actually explicitly asking them, like, build a sample outline, walk me through the drafts, walk me through what you did with AI in terms of building this. I don't know if Heather and Brad, if you've worked through instructors with this yet, or if this is still nascent.
Go ahead, Brad.
No, I was just going to say I haven't yet, but I think that's a great idea to kind of, have a lesson and then see what AI would, kind of regurgitate back to you. Is there something that you can take from it or not?
Yeah, there's several use cases out that I've, that our faculty are using, especially in the writing domains, where they're generating, they have a prompt and they use the AI to generate the output, and then they compare to others, and they use it that way. Yeah, our faculty are playing with it. They have the option to use AI in their courses if they want to. They don't have to. We've given them 3 AI statements of, they can and they might, or they're not going to be using it. And several of our faculties actually work with the students and say, hey, how do you want to use the Gen AI tool? And it could be Bing or Claude or Perplexity. And they use a brainstorming session with the students, and together they actually use the tool and see how it generates content. And so they teach it that way as well, like, not to be scared of it. And let's start playing with it. So I'm sure there's people on here out there and that have some use cases that they could share with us from faculty if they're out there. That would be helpful as well. But really, I think it's a lot about play. It's a lot about just getting out there and start using the tool. You know, you can take what you currently have for a discussion prompt and put it in any one of these tools, chatbot tools, and see how it answers your assignment, and that'll give you a really good idea on you know how it operates. So
See, we're winding down a little bit here. So Fabio, I see you had your hand raised. If you'd like, you can actually, I can click this allow to talk button. If you'd like to come on mic, you're welcome to ask your question. If you'd like. Perhaps not. Okay, let's see what other kind of things we have in the chat. You have to know what a tool won't do, and then everything else is possible. That is very true. Like, undoubtedly. What are the guardrails of what the tool will generate and what it won't? One of the things we're looking at in our tool as well is like, could we actually take some of these discussion activities that are coming from textbooks and make them a little more AI proof? Like, I've been having a bunch of conversations around authentic assessment, and can we start to lace some more ideas like that into the actual discussion activity so that it's just harder to do what Heather suggested, which is take it, paste it into ChatGPT and see what it answers. Okay, so Fabio asked, do you think AI should be integrated ASAP to the LMS in critical functions such as designer, tutor, and developer? I am more hesitant. I am a big fan of doing things at scale that have some science to back them. And I think there's a lot of people are throwing AI out as the sort of end all be all, let's have it change the world type of thing. And I am a much more careful person than that, where I'm like, well, is there something that we are sure is actually a useful thing, or at least as sure as we can be is actually a useful thing versus going gangbusters and pulling it all in. Higher education moves relatively slowly compared to the ed tech world. So the ed tech world is going to be bubbling around and trying to shove everybody in a faster direction, faster, more furious, et cetera. I tend to be much more on the cautious side to say, well, let's survey our users. What do they actually want us to do? That's where the rubric thing came from. Like, the next thing they said was, please generate rubrics for our users. And we're like, okay, fair enough. There's good science behind rubrics. Like, we can go do that without getting into direct student interaction, tutoring, and those types of things. I don't know, Heather and Brad, if you have a different viewpoint on those.
no, no.
Whole bunch of comments coming through here.
Heather and Brad, we have a question here. What other AI tools can faculty use apart from ChatGPT for learning design, if you know of any?
I mean, that's a broad question, but I mean, other than ChatGPT, I use Bing a lot. I use Claude. Perplexity, you don't have to sign up for. So if you do incorporate AI in any of your assignments, or you might have students that don't want to give their information. And so Perplexity, you don't have to sign up for, and even you might not want to get your information out there. So Perplexity is you just go to Perplexity and start typing away, so you can start using that tool. But every tool operates just a little bit differently than the other one. So you can put the exact same prompt in one and you will get a different answer from each one. Yeah, either, you know, I can't recommend one over the other because we all have our own preferences. And I think sometimes it's the user interface that determines if we like that tool or not. But I tend to gravitate towards Claude and Bing right now.
Yeah, the other, Jody actually brought up one that I was going to recommend, which is Gamma. I think it's gamma.app.
That's for presentation, isn't it?
It's for presentation, but when you're
Yeah.
thinking, when they said learning materials, I was like, a lot of
Oh,
instructors
yeah.
get stuck
Okay.
doing presentations. I'm like, so, and frankly, I love using it. You just type in an outline of what you want, and it's like, and it turns up a presentation for you, and
It does a pretty good
saves
job,
you,
right?
does a pretty good job. Like, as you go.
I think just in the end, regardless of like whatever platform or software you use, it always comes down to you're the authority, you know, with your subject matter, you know, and you're the professional in the room in terms of you're scrutinizing what it's saying. You need to make sure that you filter out that it's using best practices and that it's reaching those goals and objectives that you're trying to accomplish with your students. And depending on, you know, what platform or software it is, you're going to get a bunch of different stuff regurgitated back to you, you know, and you may be using the same language and keywords. But again, at the end of the day, I think, you know, like our guidance at our institution is really just, you have got to scrutinize this, you know, don't just, oh, look, it spit this out and I gave it this learning objective. It's going to be great, right? You know, you've got to filter it out, you know, and you need to always be that authority with what you're going to present to your students.
Yeah, Joshua Whittinghill made a great comment in the chat, which I think is important to keep in mind, which is, what is the AI's impact on equity, diversity, and inclusion? How are you addressing these? And our approach to this has been like, well, everything has to go through a user review. Like, an instructor has to say, add this to my instructions. They have to then edit it. We're actually going so far as to thinking of putting up a dialog box of like, if you didn't change a single word of what ChatGPT wrote, we're going to ask you, are you sure? Type of thing. Did you really read it? Are you being careful with it? So that at the very least, we can use the same detector of what the instructor wrote themselves. Do they recognize when there are non-equitable things happening? Can we at least fall in line with that? So we don't show anything that's written directly to students unless the instructors had a chance to review it and approve it, so that we can try to stop anything that comes up that is troubling from some of the AI engines. Which I think also is why I'm a little hesitant to say like, well, let's turn the tutors loose. Let's have them direct student interaction, et cetera, because it hallucinates, it's dangerous, it does crazy things. So, okay, about 5 minutes left. Any last questions coming in? Otherwise, we can wrap up a few minutes early. Awesome. All right, well, thank you so much. David, Heather, Brad, thank you so much for joining me on this. And thank you everyone for who attended. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you, Marcus.
Awesome. And as a reminder, we will send out a recording. I'll send out the chat and we'll get all that rolling for you. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.